Hey, welcome to F50Woman. I am here with Helen Corey today. She is an executive, an experienced professional, founder, and a creator. I'm so excited to have Helen here. It's just amazing how we connected. Helen, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Great. Thank you so much, Joy. I'm really happy to be here today.
I was looking on the website and looking at some of the things you do, and I was like, when could you ever meet such an incredible lady? I feel so gifted. So blessed today. So this is great. I'm looking forward to hearing about you, your life, who you were, things you've gone through, lessons you've learned, and what you're doing now. So why don't we just start off and talk about you as a younger woman? Tell us about who you were.
I think like anybody during your younger years, you're testing your boundaries and you're trying to learn what kind of gets you out of bed in the morning. And sometimes that's a cup of coffee. And sometimes it's a job, one or the other. But if you can marry both, that's great.
Yeah.
I really grew up in a small town. I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware. Clearly, everybody in the world knows where that is today, having the current president from this area. But I really went to a private school. It was strange growing up in a bubble and in that arena, but it created some fundamentals in learning how to budget your time, the value of education. But I was not a stellar academic. I learned by doing and learned that early in life, which was really important for my career. And my first job was one I wanted to get when I didn't want my parents to help me get a job. When I left high school and into university, I did all my university at night and worked during the day, but I had no skill sets. When you sort of come, you're expected to go on to university and spend your time there. I didn't have any formidable skills, so I learned to type. And, the old typewriters where you still had to use whiteout and carbon paper on,
That's right. You had to roll it back in. Yeah.
Yes. But I worked actually for a fantastic job. I worked for a U.S. residential real estate firm with like 30, residential people all vying for commissions and stuff. Really learned a lot about human nature and learned a lot about politics and how to manage diversity. And I realized that unless you understood early how to play the game and set your stall out about what was important to you, it was quite easy to get caught in the flow of life. So I began asking questions very early in my career and learned that I really like to work with people and build things. I learned that you weren't really able to, so you needed to really bring other people along with you. I also learned that if you didn't find your right tribe or find the right people that gave you energy and moved you forward, it could be very detrimental. You end up making bad decisions or not being able to accomplish goals. I dug in deep. I grafted early. I finished all my university at night and my graduate school at night. And I ended up just rolling into jobs. I don't think I've ever really applied for a job in my life past that. Run into people that have said, oh, I want to work with you. I see a problem in the marketplace and I'd like to do that. I didn't shy away from asking questions. I really wanted to be on that business development and operational side, and found myself saying in roles that I had, does this make me happy? I think that's an important question I've asked throughout my life.
Yes. Wow. That's pretty cool. Because who asks that question?
I don't know.
How much money can I make and how much? Yeah.
Exactly.
How much can I keep running? Yeah.
Exactly. And that's hard to do when you're 20, and 20 and into your 30s. I mean, that's really tough. If you're passionate about something and want to do something, you don't have enough gray hair to hold yourself at the table. So you either have to be exceptional, which I wouldn't necessarily put myself in that group, but I was more than above average because I was willing to state my position. I either knew something or I didn't, and was prepared to be vulnerable and say, I don't know this and I want to learn it, or I want to learn from you, or be involved in this. I can either accelerate or can't accelerate, and tested stuff that I did. There were things that frustrated me and things that were really great. I cut my teeth in some areas and rounded out some of my sharp edges, as you normally have as you're going through business at that age.
Yes, absolutely. So you said so many incredible things, and I just really heard the one where you're being vulnerable and asking questions. I'm wondering, as a woman, as you were working, was that hard for you? Was it natural? A lot of times we want to try to be tough and say, I know that, and you don't really know it, but you're trying to be something. You don't want them to think you're weaker, not as smart,
I always want to be the dumbest person in the room. I always want to work with people that I can learn from, and hence that ability to not wanting to be always right or having the answer all the time. And I think because I tried a bunch of different things, and I had that confidence because I figured the worst thing that someone can say is no.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask and you want something, the worst thing they say is no. And if you didn't have it before, then you're no worse off, right?
Right.
So if you're willing to sort of say that up front. And then I think the second part was I had enough confidence to say, well, if this doesn't work, and I don't know whether it's personality or the job or the role or things change, that I was able to go get another job. Yeah. So having that confidence of, well, how bad can it be? And if you're willing to fail, I mean, all calculated, and it's not like you just willy-nilly. It's different when you say, I want to be a nurse or a doctor, right? That's a very skilled profession. You have to go a number of years. You have a lot of expertise and criteria, lawyers and things like that. In business and operations and software and manufacturing and marketing, there are some gray areas that you can oscillate between and test things about yourself. And I think with those, you are able to say, if this one doesn't work out, either the macro part about the business don't work, the micro parts of you don't like the people you work with, you can just say, I'm willing to get another job. I think one of the things I also learned is that everything has a beginning, middle, and end. Things can be really crappy and you want to work through it. Sometimes you just have to ride that wave. It wasn't fun. It's going to be in the middle. I'm in the icky part, but it will come to an end. And if you can help yourself forecast for that. And I think that's for looking at roles too. The point about where my parents worked for companies for 30 gazillion years, right? That is not something I look at myself in my careers or ones I've created for myself. I look at my kids and they've had several jobs that didn't even exist when I was there. So I think that ability to put yourself out there and say, I don't know what it is. I want to be involved. I like those people. I think I can learn from them. And be honest and ask questions. I ask questions all the time.
I love that. I'm going to remember that. Ask questions. You don't know what you don't know, and you'll never know if you don't ask.
And I was asked to start one of my businesses called Amped Associates. I started that business after finishing a different role. A family member had this idea and they're like, oh, I don't know how to start this company. You've done a couple. Can you help me? And I knew nothing about the energy business, right? I mean, I wasn't going to be an engineer fixing big turbines. I wasn't going to be competent based on the level of effort and where the market is. So I realized that when I'm in those positions, I hire the best people around me that can fend off the, oh, I don't want to work with you. So I hired the best board I could. But the one thing was I found, because I would go into meetings and go, I'm sorry, what does that acronym mean? Or what does that term mean? And I would find that most people in the meeting didn't know either. Like, okay, well, let's all learn together. And it wasn't like, oh, why were you saying that? I would always be like, that's great. Let's all learn together. Like, what does that mean? And how is it applied? And kind of bring the room along with you. So I never saw that as a negative in my world.
Nice. Okay.
Just turn this light on real quick. So you're better light. There you go.
So you feel like, did you always want to be a businesswoman? When you were little, did you want to do something else? Yeah. Where did that all come from?
I'm terrible at any of the arts. I have such an appreciation for those people. I don't draw very well, stick figures at the best. And, sons with just the little lines, no sort of varying degrees. I'm a basic picture drawer. I would be horrific on Pictionary, but I didn't really have an affinity for the arts. And I always like to solve complex problems. In our family, we always have a puzzle going on the table. How do all the pieces fit together? How do they work? How quick can you do them? How complicated can they be? And that just kind of seems how business is. There's always a problem to solve. So I naturally gravitated. I started out in HR and realized that in my 20s, I didn't really get the whole touchy-feely aspect of HR. This is sort of when working at home was starting. I'm like, well, they tripped inside their homes. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate it, but I'm like, they should be more cognizant. I gravitated more towards the the binary aspect of systems and big ERP systems and HR data more than EI. I didn't learn an EI piece till very later in life. I wish I had done that earlier. HR, I loved it because you were just learning about people. It was like, tell me about yourself. You learn and you could help people grow. You see people do silly things. That's where I first started. And I realized that wasn't for me in some aspects, but gravitated and pulled the pieces I did like and sort of used that to catapult myself.
Nice. Knowing who you are and what you like or what makes me happy and what fits for me, and don't be afraid to move around. So tell us about who you are now, what you do. It sounds like you've done some really incredible things, and we'd love to hear what those are.
I've oscillated between having my own companies. I started my first company back in early 2000s and developed an M&A solution for the marketplace. I was a bit early for sort of the market curve, but luckily kind of got out of that and then went into larger businesses running thousands of people in multiple countries. Every single time I found an issue that wasn't being addressed, I would start my own company. So I kind of moved in and out. I was in financial services for a good period of my life. When the bust came within the marketplace, I was taking a step back anyway. I ended up getting into energy, as I said earlier, and that was just bizarre, creating and building and understanding how energy worked and how people use it and how people literally didn't know how much energy they use and how difficult it was. People just assumed you flip on the switch and electricity comes to your house, and how the national grids work and where there's congestion about how energy is delivered. It was just a fantastic experience. And I leveraged that. I met some tremendous people. I had to raise capital in an area I didn't understand. I had a 10 billion book of business and ended up selling that off to another business and was doing large consulting, going in and turning around companies and things like that. And that just wasn't doing it for me. I wasn't building something. I was helping people save stuff. That was making sure that Northern Rock, which was similar to the Lehman's here, got bailed out by the government, and I sold them back to Virgin Money at the time. And, large, big turnaround chunkies. And that just wasn't doing it for me. And ran into a person haphazardly and ended up really enjoying their company. And I had done some private investing in the health and wellness space over the last couple of years. And we just decided we were going to start a venture capital fund. I've managed my own money. I've managed billions in budgets, but never managed a venture capital fund. So we started that process late last year. And we're raising our first fund now to invest in the health and wellness space. It's fascinating being on that side where people are pitching you business. I've been a founder, rolled your sleeves up. What does it really take to do something? And now being able to bring all of those skill sets together and having then that flexibility to actually do the investments, I think is just electrifying for me.
Yeah. And that's your company, 8 Dimension Ventures. It's
and the
really very interesting. Yeah.
Health and wellness. We were trying to figure out what we were going to do with our name. Name is so important. And the 8 dimensions are actually coming out of the academic arena and sociology about how people should be more well-rounded. And we thought that fit our thesis so well. Thank gosh the name wasn't taken.
I'm really interested because it sounds like the transitions in your life were really smooth. But I imagine there were some bumps and challenges. Can you share with us what was one of your biggest life lessons through all this? Business lesson,
Right. So there, you sort of think about this. I don't have I think my oh my God moment was in my 20s, really watching how other people treat other people and what people will do to other people. That's just kind of not how I roll. So I always held that as a framework for me as I went through my roles. There were certainly highs, lows, worked long hours, slept under desks, deadlines, pitching for money, not getting the money that you wanted, running out of money when you're running your business, putting your own money up, all those sort of sit there. As you go through life lessons or things you would pick out of the thorniness of how you build your career and your life. Right. I think there's a couple of things. Is one, really ensuring that you keep a balance.
Okay.
As I said, you sort of get storm in a teacup, things happen and you're like, oh my gosh, it's over, but it will wash through. But I think that really taking a step back, looking at your stuff objectively is probably the biggest transition for everything. I think the worst thing that happened was a shocker of what people can do to themselves. Was a very good friend of mine who ended up terribly getting on drugs and what had sheltered it for quite some time. I think all the skills that I've worked through my year about asking questions and things, when I went to see him, I knew nothing about drugs or drug treatments or what do you do in these situations, but managing difficult situations, asking all the questions, working through the logical, having to actually discuss horrible things with his family, all those skill sets that you refine, I think manifested itself in other ways. But probably my biggest transition was not in a business situation. It was personal to say, really need to take a step back and keep an orientation in your own life in a reflective way and making sure that you are taking time out for yourself. It's hard to do. No, it's your friend. It's the smallest word, but the
hardest thing for people to say. Yes. See, I'm saying it now. Yes, but it is very hard to say.
It's very
you feel
hard.
like you're letting people down, or you feel like they might not like you. They're not going to pick me next time if I say no this time.
It's the first word I try to teach entrepreneurs to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And that you find that they have a hard time saying it in terms of taking work or undervaluing themselves in terms of what they're willing to take in turn with price.
I exactly. And I think saying no to anybody, you hate to say no to your spouse, you hate to say no to your parents, I hate to say no to my kids, you know, and I think where I've gotten to is I carve out an hour every day for myself. It is my hour. And you have to be religious about making sure that doesn't get infringed on. The reason why I'm so pedantic about it is because if you're not prepared to do that for yourself, then you aren't prepared to do it for other things. And I think out of all the things that you have, I have respect for myself first. That's taken a while to do. It's not something you do overnight, I think. But I think the sooner that individuals can take that into practice, it really is a lifesaver and it provides freedom.
And I love just silence. But like you said, you don't take the time, you don't carve it out and say, this is my time.
I always orient people to time because there's 24 hours in a day. And no matter what economic strata you're in, you all get 24 hours. The one thing I think, you know, just kind of going a little off piece for a second, but bringing that back in is the only thing I think that money does is money buys you the ability to reflect and use probably the time more efficiently or take longer to make decisions in a more well-rounded way. When you're running, then you burn up your time because you're either stressed for cash or whatever. But I think part of being able to say, out of a whole, let's say you sleep 7 hours and then you're going to be awake for us. So out of all that, in 24, I always say out of 24, I'm just taking one. And the rest I'm willing, you know, the sleep you have to do, eventually you just crash if you don't. But out of all the demands that people will have for you, family and business, is to really take that time.
Now, during all of this process and these lessons you've learned, even in business, did you have a mentor? Did you have someone to help you? Who did you lean on? Was it purposeful? Yeah.
I had great people. Because I was never afraid to just go up and ask and say, I have a question, or do you think that you can explain this better to me? Or I found this about you, I don't understand it, or I want to learn more. And I think that still back to the vulnerability of, well, they won't mentor me because I am who I think people, when they have reached certain levels, and transitioned into a more reflective and giving back mode in their life, will find the time. I have had some absolutely fantastic members who, even to this day, I've added to my 8 Dimension Ventures board because they've been with me for so long. I want those people who will not drink my Kool-Aid and will be able to say, listen, I know you. Some of those people come from really unique environments. One comes from a nonprofit who deals with kids, and kids for me are fantastic to pitch things against. They just tell you how it is.
They
right?
just tell you straight.
One of my best mentors really early on is my daughter. I mean, she's just like, I need you to do that. She's so giving, and she teaches school in the international school in Budapest. She's in Budapest now,
Wow.
but
Okay.
she really is about education and what is the next stage of those educations around. When I think through like, all right, well, how do people learn? If I wanted to explain something, how do people learn? And I want to go to her and say, well, if I want to say to this, how does that work? Being able to look for those nuggets. I've had people in high ends of business, which names certainly are known to many, who have given me, even if it's just, I've had mentors who have been there for 10 or 15 years. We've sort of almost oscillated. I've been in one area, they've been in another, and we've shared that journey and respect for each other. But I think everybody has something to give.
Yeah.
You just have to be willing and open to listen to what they're prepared to tell you. I've sought out people. I'm like, I need you to teach me this. How can you do that?
Having a variety. Not everybody can do everything. Not one person can do everything for you. Now, if you were to meet your younger self, what is one piece of advice you would give her?
I would probably say, breathe. Just breathe. Life gets really hard sometimes. I've been stretched for cash. I've been ill, everything that everybody else does.
Yeah.
But I think you have to think through it, and you have to think logically. But at the end of the day, I think people, and I mean breathe, like, be able to reflect and understand outside of physical breathing. Obviously, you want to keep breathing, but it is, instead of doing the woe is me, the glass is half empty, it's never going to get better. Those are times where you just have to say, right, I'm just going to let this one ride. And I think that if I had done that earlier, rather than trying to solve it all the time and grind to that finish before either other people were prepared to do their part, or pushing the agenda too fast, so therefore there's collateral damage and what the outcome could have done, then I think really being able to just breathe, sit there and go, okay, be with it. And it's hard to be in the moment sometimes like that.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good one. I've heard that one before. Just breathe. Yeah.
And it's hard.
Yes. And so tell us what's next for you. You did talk about your business. Is there anything else?
Add one more thing to
the
yes,
last please
question?
Do.
Yeah, sorry. So I think the other thing is nothing is a straight line, right? Everybody always wants to go, well, I'm going to be extra, and
yes,
I'm going to
please talk about that.
Right. It is not a straight line. Business is not a straight line. Marriage is not a straight line. I think that's where a hard piece is, to mismatch that expectation and trying to fit things into a box. And I think where I've always worked from is teaching my younger self, when you're there and you just want things to go fast. I look now and I'm like, oh my God, it's already September. Where is this year gone? That whole thing when you're growing up, your parents would say like, oh, you don't want to wish that too fast. Yeah. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm my parents. I think the whole part about nothing should ever be, shouldn't plan 100%, right? I think the one thing is to manage risk. It is the ability to say, here's a framework. I think it's going to go like this, but you have to ease some of that wiggle room, because it's never going to go as you expect. I always say, when people are in that wedding part and people would be like, oh, my wedding, and I hope this doesn't go wrong. And I'm like, listen, you and your groom are the only ones who know what's supposed to happen. Everyone else is just there for the experience. And it's never going to go as you expect, right? There's always something. On my wedding, my dog was the ring carrier and they jumped into the water, right? It's just, you're just like, wait, I hadn't planned for that. An one.
Early example. Yeah.
So I think, being able to align and feel comfortable that there's a diversion, and what does that diversion teach you, and how are you going to leverage that, rather than trying to keep nudging into where it was. Where is it going to go? I think is important.
That's a beautiful one, because did I ever think I had it all figured out until the road started turning, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do? And then you get to a certain part of the road and you're thinking, I was supposed to be somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it can be very frustrating if you don't just realize. I hope everybody hears what you just said, that it's not a straight line.
I mean, I look
Nothing.
at myself now, right? I'm 55 and I sit
Mhm.
there and go, oh my gosh, well, when I was in my 20s, did I think I would be where I am now? And then I'm like, oh, well, if I was in my 30s, where would I be now? Oh, and then if I go to my 40s, I'm like, oh my God, I'm
Yeah.
nowhere where I thought I would be.
Yeah.
And then in my 50s, I was like, oh my gosh, every single decade, people think, oh my God, I'm going to be 55. What do I do? And I'm like, I'm 55. Look at all the stuff I can do, right?
Yes.
That is having that freedom where you've passed I've got a little gray hair
Yeah.
and you've spent enough time in the industry where you can actually start to pick and choose
Yeah.
better what you want to do. Your straight lines become a little more aligned. You don't have as much variability. I think the whole aspect of you just have to feel comfortable in your own skin at this age.
Yes. And then when you look back, you're talking about all the different, you look back at 20s and 30s and 40s and how you didn't think you'd end up in those places, but it's not all bad. It's
No,
actually like, wow,
I
I couldn't have
enjoyed
made
my
that up
40s. My
myself. Yeah.
40s were great. I
Yeah.
loved my 40s. I hated
Yeah.
my 20s, and my 30s were little rough and edgy.
Yeah.
Now you're like, oh my gosh, this is what I was meant to do and why I did all the things I did. I think Steve Jobs did a speech somewhere in a Stanford graduate where he said, when you look back and you can start to see how all the dots connect.
Yeah.
I'm starting now to understand the straight line isn't a straight line, but an interesting mosaic.
Yes. Nice. And it's so beautiful. And I
Yeah.
hope that younger women are listening, really younger women are listening, and just wait for it.
Yeah.
Breathe.
Breathe.
Yep. It's going to look beautiful when you're done. Yes. So what's next for you? I know you have your business, which sounds really incredible. We'll talk about how people can get online and see that at the end. But what else?
So what are you going to do? I decided at 40, I was going to run a 10K, failed miserably in that attempt. I did run it, but hurt my knee terribly and had a
Oh, wow.
recovery after that. So I find that I need to be a little more careful physically as you get older. Upper body strength, for anyone who's listening, upper body strength and core, focus on those. They will.
Yep.
I've watched my grandparents and my parents lift themselves up and move. It is the be all end all from a physical standpoint. So for me, I think is just to be healthy and mentally healthy, being able to take things in stride. And I want to have fun. I mean, I want to build this venture capital firm to really be something to focus on people and planet, where we're tending to make our investments, to use it as a vehicle to drive some of the broader initiatives that we're thinking. And I think personally is recognizing, one, that my husband and I can spend time in our home on a continuous basis and still not kill each other, which is great.
Yes.
So I'm
That's a
feeling
victory.
I'm feeling pretty accomplished
Yes.
with COVID with that. But I think it is, in my 20s, I looked for how was I going to spend or what was I going to do when I was 50. Now I'm 50 and I'm like, okay, so if you have a good 40 years till I'm 90 or 35 years till I'm 90, what do I want to do in those 35? I think focusing now on what is the best way to spend the 35. It isn't accumulating things. I think it's more of doing things and experiencing things and sharing things with people. I think that's really where my focus is.
Any particular experiences you want to have?
I think for us, I'm not a big heights person, so we'll steer away from those. I think for us, it's really what parks or forests and things like that can we walk in. We're just moving back from London and splitting our time between London and the US. So I think our journey over the next 5 years is really, where do we want to be?
Enjoying the beauty, the craziness, and the simple things like a pathway of trees,
Well, you can see, I mean, this is someplace where we walk.
I know, I was thinking of that when I looked at it.
And, that is kind of where I spend my hour and, no phone, no nothing. But I think I've given up on the, do I need a Louis Vuitton purse and stuff? For me, health and time with family and time with my kids. And those are the most important things for me.
And do you think that our children, our grandchildren will be able to get that earlier? Where you don't need all this. It seems like everybody's looking at everybody else's stuff and how much stuff you have and how cute you look. How can we help them to get that
I think
being.
I'll give a couple of examples,
Yeah.
which are a little esoteric, but I will bring it back. So
Yeah.
we lived overseas for a number of years. My younger brother had children,
Mhm.
and we were not able to travel back for a number of years. So the only way we could really see them was through video. It's really hard to communicate with a 6-month-old or a 1-year-old doing the dancing things across and stuff. When we were actually able to come back, Chloe was a couple of years old by then, and she walked into our house here, and she was scared of us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because we were usually like television, right? Very flat. And now we were like these people, you know, we had dimensions and we talked and we could interact with her in a much different way. And it was very scary. So that piece is an orientation to what the power of technology has done in sort of allowing people to still bring along journeys. Yeah. Second thing was around wearable devices. So Fitbits or Garmin's or whatever your sort of tracker is, if you have one. But I found overseas was my parents got Fitbits and we could see each other's scores and things like that. And it gave them a little emphasis.
Yes.
And with that, the great thing for me was when I would wake up and I would do my thing in about 12 noon, because it would be 7 a.m. here in the US, I would be able to go on Fitbit and look and see. And if I saw their numbers moving, I knew they were up. Alive, and I didn't have to call or worry, right?
Wow.
So you've got all these pieces of technology that haven't been orientated for their purpose, but have provided almost an indirect value. So within that, you sit there and go, the younger generation is playing with stuff at a rate where my generation, your generation is functional, right? They are pushing the edges, and technology will move. We'll be in augmented reality in 5 years and we'll just put our glasses on and do, right? It is traveling so fast. So when you ask the question, there are pieces I think that people adopt and can absorb into their daily life that is not scary. I'm not a big video game player. I video call, we're videoing here. And because of technology, we were able to find and connect. I think what will happen is the younger generations will have the sense of connection because it will now just be second nature. Like they don't know that to plug a VCR or a CD in and watch a movie, right? It just streams. I do think they will find it harder, where I think us at this point have some of that social interaction and being in the same place and that orientation. I'm hoping that aspect is not lost, and that is something that the younger generation refines, because you walk into rooms and everybody's staring at a phone or a tablet. Right at our house, the phones go in a basket and you sit at the dinner table and you talk, right? It is that core, that it's that conversational piece. And so I think what our calibration will be different, the measurements will be different, but I think that personalization is something they will have to strive to keep.
Right. And in your business and in your work, did you find that the younger generations, that was showing up in the way they work or the way they wanted to work?
I think the way they wanted to work. It's interesting when people are in school and then they go to university. University is all about individualism. I don't care if you go to class or whatever. But then they come out and go into business, and business was all about being together. It was immersive, and I need to see you in your seat and all that kind of stuff. And now through COVID, that's all been torn apart, right? Because everybody's now dispersed. So I think at the beginning of COVID, it was struggling because people didn't know what Zoom was, and that sort of tangibility and sharing and moving documentation and that confidence around it. I think COVID has trajected us, 10, probably 15 years ahead, where the norms where that college, younger 20 generations were coming out. So I think that transition is easier. I think it's been harder for our generation to slot into the working method and that marrying of productivity and contribution. And I think we've a lot, because now the anonymity of whether you're a gender, you can have that anonymity and show that you can produce or give the ability of what you can do. And so therefore, if I said I was Joe and I put up an avatar, you don't know until you hear my voice, but I can actually demonstrate competence in a way, and you don't know whether I'm young, old. So that anonymity has certainly, I think, required people to reorient their working style and their outcomes much different than before. And I think everybody is learning and becoming better corporate citizens because of that.
Wow, that is a very interesting perspective in the anonymity and how that affects how we work and how we can work better. That's incredible. Yes. I wrote that down. I'm going to think about that a little bit. I love it because I never thought about it that way. Thank you for sharing that. So what is one book that you would advise all women to read?
I would read Soul of a New Machine by Tracy Kidder. It is about the development of the next generation of computers with Data General. And it's about how they built the next generation in the basement of Data General. Because in the cogs and how the corporation couldn't get it done. So they created a whole separate team that worked on this particular innovative computer. And it's all about taking risks, managing change, going for broke, and having the right skill sets. And the book opens up with the talk about this guy, and he's on this sailboat and with some people, and there's a really bad storm, and everybody's freaking out because woe was me, the boat's rocking and everything, and this guy just clicks and he's battening down the hatches, and all the things, and he's just really calm, and it sort of then ends at the discussion around this particular storm in this boat. Someone says, this is a good man in a storm. And he ends up becoming the project manager for this Data General thing, because you need someone who can deal with volatility and bringing things together. And it's just a fantastic book that gives you an orientation to why getting the right teams and factoring innovation in and thinking and collaborative is important.
Would you recommend that book to, say, I'm not really into business and I'm not really into management? Would you recommend that book to women who are just wanting to build families or do the touchy-feely stuff?
Yeah, because I think for me, it's pretty cool because there's chapters in there like Flying Upside Down, and it talks about how they had to flip the whole aspect of how they looked at stuff. It's all about orientation and asking yourself the right questions. Am I doing something because I want to do it, or is it the right thing to do for the team? That factors into families. Am I forcing my kids to go play football because I always played football? Am I forcing my children? I waited till my son was going off to university, and I said, you can't cook, and I need to teach you how to cook a dish, because otherwise you're going to either starve, you're going to either buy food. But if you actually want to date someone, it'd be really nice if you cooked her a meal at some point. The dish I taught him to cook was spaghetti and meatballs, and he still cooks that today. I think it's important that some of the life skills transcend business. It is about patience and focus and knowing when you've gone too far. I think this embodies all of that.
Nice. I'm going to have to check that one out. I have one question. How do you go? So you were running businesses in a certain sector, and then you moved over into the energy. How do you make that transition and be successful when you're not versed in that industry? I know you talked about it a little bit, but I'm just so curious. I'm having a hard time seeing how does that work? What are the skills that you bring across that allows you to just run the group of specialists?
Well, I think energy, I wouldn't have normally gone into it. It was, as I said, a request from someone who I knew. But I think the starting point is knowing that you weren't going to fake it. Like no one was going to look at me and say, how the hell can you be in energy? Knowing that you don't have to stand up and say, everyone is going to be looking at me for the answers because I'm not going to have them. That was the first part. And I do that with lots of things that I don't know. The second thing is saying, what are we trying to achieve? What are we going to do? And what do we need to do it? Then it's starting to say, we're going to have energy projects and they're going to look like this. Those energy projects take X, Y, or Z. And then I went and found the resources that I needed. So
Okay.
I needed someone who understood energy and someone who understood pricing and someone who understood
Okay.
gasoline. I just
Yeah.
went to them and said, here's the vision of what it's supposed to be. Some joined, some didn't. And with that, you just start to piece together a business. Does this make sense? Can we make money? And you go back to what I would consider core business skill sets. Through time, I would sit there and say, all right, tell me how this works. I would be like, okay,
Yeah.
so gas comes out of a pipe, goes into the engine, and the engine produces energy. The energy gets calibrated. And
Mhm.
if it's generated at X megahertz, then it has to come down to 15 in order to fit into a grid. And I would just draw the pictures
Yeah.
and have all these pictures about how does it work, almost like piecing together Legos. I took the role as the orchestrator.
Okay.
I ended up bringing in the expertise or the project managers and took on the ability to be the conductor of the business. That's what most CEOs do at the end of the day anyway. They can't know everything. You have to be broad enough to understand how to manage risk, be prudent about how you spend your money.
Right. Okay. I am so inspired by you, Helen. I really am. At least I do. And maybe some listeners will feel the same way. I always feel like I need to know everything before I go into a room. I'm imagining I'm not alone. If I wanted to go to an engineering company, well, goodness gracious, I need to get a degree in engineering now or a certificate. But like you said, you're the orchestrator. That's why all those really smart people are there already.
Yeah,
Or
it's
you bring them
interesting.
in.
If you remember back in my time going to school, you had the Dewey Decimal System and you physically walked into a library and you'd look up a book and you'd take the card and you'd have to go on the lines and the book wasn't there. And then you're like, I got to go and I put my name on a list for someone to do it, right? The access to information was very clunky and painful. Now data is pouring in from multiple areas. I think the hardest thing now is to say, what piece of information do I want? And I think university kids, younger people, it's not about, I don't look for people to regurgitate what's there. I can easily say, hey, Alexa, or hey, Siri. So I think where it's important is to say, if I have this information, what am I going to do with it? How do I make it better? And build on that. That's why the collaborative piece works really well. You have to be prudent to yourself and look at multiple sources, read and talk to multiple people. If you're inside your bubble and everybody's saying yes, it's my spider senses tingle. I need someone who's saying no, that doesn't work. One of the things that I can impart for younger people as they're going through business or even in their families is when they find someone who is anti whatever they're doing, they're, I don't want to go on holiday, or I don't want to do that business idea or whatever. Everyone tries so hard to make that person say yes. Right. And I never did that. Okay. I always wanted that person just to get to neutral. Because if they're in neutral, they are never going to be a roadblock. Right. If you spend all of your energy desperately trying to get someone to say yes, then you will miss either spend a lot of money, miss a deadline or whatever. And so I think calibrating your people or your business associates or your family, you just need to ask them why. What are the drivers that make them that way? And figure out how to just get them neutral. You don't need to be rah-rah and yes, let's go. You just need to get them to neutral, because then they're just stop being noisy. Yeah.
That's a good piece of advice. Yeah.
And the other thing I would always do is, this is sort of in my business, but I would always call the secretaries of every single manager that would be in my meetings, because they're either going to have a bad day. They fought with their wife. They fought with their husband. They fought with their kids. Yeah. They didn't get the coffee they wanted, but they're going to bring that into the meeting. So you just want to know so that you can just bring it up. And if you know that someone's against something that you're going to be in a meeting, whether that's in a family huddle or a business meeting, you just want to be the first one to put it on the table. You want to take the energy out of the room. If you know that your son doesn't want to go to football and he's going to sit there and say, I hate that you give me football, I would just sit there and say, why don't you like going to football?
Yeah. Okay.
Tips and tricks to hopefully kind of make that a little easier.
How does that, you gave a great example with your son. Now, do you have an example in the boardroom? Hey, Bill, you had a fight with your wife this morning, and I know you did.
I was trying to get this very, very large project across the line. It was double-digit millions. And there was someone who had tried it several years prior, and the project did not get funded because they weren't the one bringing it to the table. But the things that were different were technology had moved a significant amount. Some of the underlying business decisions that needed to be more aligned had taken place, and the market had shifted. While the project was supposed to have maybe put forward 5 years, it wasn't the right time. It was ahead of when it needed to be. So I just happened to be the one that was bringing it forward, adamant that it was not going to. And they were in a fairly responsible position. So I certainly looked at the 6 degrees of separation and said, all right, who are the influencers that this person talks to, and seeded some of those issues and put some of the objectives that he had been voicing to others. I put them directly in the presentation. I was just like, here's the reasons why this project should not go forward. Boom, 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 which were all the reasons why he would have said. And then my whole presentation was then around why that probably could be mitigated. It wasn't that it was wrong. It was just, how could it be mitigated?
Right.
And so when each one of these things were being raised, it took the energy out of that person's lobbing them onto the table. There were a few that weren't addressed. And also I have to say, being a woman in the boardroom is very rare and few and far between. So you do have a separate lens on that, because you don't want to be seen as picky or, bitchy or whatever, managing it at an appropriate level. But when you find yourself in those situations, it's really important to keep yourself intact, not to take the bait, and really logically just work through the issues. I never would argue in the boardroom. If there was something raised and I would do, and they'd like, yep, that's a really good point. Yeah. Something we had considered, something we hadn't considered. Let me take that away and I will come back to you. If not, it becomes a one-to-one rather than about the issue. It becomes personal. Yeah. I learned personal never works. So you have to kind of diffuse it.
Yeah, because once you get there, it's a whole nother level of resistance.
It is, because now you're fighting on two fronts. Right. You're fighting on two fronts.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing. Please tell the audience where and how we can get in touch with you, your website. Give us information about that.
Sure. You can certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm there. I'm more than happy to take requests. You can reach out to me via our website on www.8dimension.ventures. I know that's weird. That's 8dimension.ventures. Helen Corey, and more than happy to talk and share what I know.
And do you do this as part of your work, or on the side, do you help other business people, business women individually to, get to the next level or navigate their careers?
I mentor some. I sit on boards of others, and now obviously putting my money where my mouth is, and others' money where my mouth is, with founders who are looking to get to the next level to fund them as well.
Please get in touch with Helen if you have any questions, if you need some advice. I'm telling you, she's just full of experience. Experience is so much better than a book, because you've been there, done it, interacted with it, and gone through it. Thank you again for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.